Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 5. Several hours later, in a well-lit chamber beneath Iceland's rocky surface, the UEL Security Council once again sat in closed session. The council had received the latest report from the Third Fleet, and after digesting the news, were debating the best course of action. From a corner of the chamber, General Jacob de Veers impassively watched the spirited debate. Across from him, he noted the UEDF commander-in-chief seated with the heads of the United Earth Fleet, UEF, United Earth Marine Corps, UEMC, United Earth Army, UEA, United Earth Air Force, UEF, and Mecha Command, MECCOM. Together, they represented the coordinated commands of Earth's defense forces. De Veers also noticed the presence of one other figure standing quietly behind the others, a formidable-looking warrior in the dress uniform of an Excalibur Division assault commander. De Veers knew from experience that the man was the eyes and ears of the 10 assault division commanders. It had always intrigued him as to why the First 10 had built a clause into the UEL Constitution that guaranteed a representative of the 10 assault divisions a place at any meeting of the executive branch of government. The 10 assault divisions were nominally part of the UEA, as they lacked their own separate independent command, but the divisional leaders were not constitutionally bound to follow orders from any branch of the UEL executive or wider UEDF commands. This meant that they were technically a law unto themselves, although by convention they had always come under Stratcom's control during time of war. De Veers broke into a rare smile. Perhaps the UEL's founders didn't trust the politicians either, he thought. He refocused on the debate. The floor had just been given over to the senator for planetary defense. He was a man De Veers knew well, and the senator acknowledged De Veers' presence with a slight nod as he rose to speak. Madam Chairwoman, Senators, we have all read the detailed report provided to us by the intelligence services. Let us review the facts. The facts as they stand are that a hostile alien power has committed an act of war against the United Earth League, and dare I say it, against humanity itself. They have destroyed one of our warships and kidnapped or killed thousands of our citizens. There can be no doubt that this is a hostile act. Peaceful contact with a new species is not made in such ways, and we must not delude ourselves into thinking that such a course is still possible. Irrespective of the individual hopes or wishes of the honorable senators here tonight, war is upon us, a war that we neither started nor desired, but a war that we must win. Billions of lives, maybe even the future of humanity itself, is now at stake if we fail to act. He paused for effect. De Veers knew from his intelligence files on the senators that the majority of them liked the senator for planetary defense, and the majority of those that didn't still respected his opinion when he gave it. So, with this most solemn knowledge, what are we gathered here to do? First, in my opinion, it is imperative that we do not let the news of this threat become public. The public are not yet ready to hear it. We must release the information slowly over an extended period of weeks and months, or as time dictates. We cannot defend this planet amid a mass panic. De Veers noted several heads nodding in agreement. That was good. He had spent some time convincing the Planetary Defense Senator of his course of action, but it was now up to him to get it approved. In the meantime, Senators, it is vital that we do not waste a moment. Wars are not won through idleness. We must start a full mobilization of every possible resource to our defense. That means emergency funding to increase production of all forms of armaments and a rapid expansion of all branches of the armed services. One of the senators spoke up and asked how such an increase could be achieved without alerting the public. Madam Senator, I thank you for your timely question. I have spoken at length to the defense chiefs about that very issue. They have assured me that there will be no initial need for a special recruitment campaign that could alarm the public. Due to the restricted size of the defense forces, they turn away many times more people than they require each year. With this council's approval, that will stop. Defense has also kept the details of all previous applicants for the last 5 years, all of whom will be contacted and offered positions. This will be combined with the activating of all reserve units to full active service, which the media shall be instructed to report as a measure undertaken due to personnel shortages. These measures, combined with increased armaments production, will vastly enlarge the defense forces within the shortest possible time. The senator paused again, but the inquiring senator appeared satisfied and offered no further interjection. Fellow senators, the Earth is only as strong as its leadership. We are that leadership. Others may shirk their responsibilities, but we gathered here serve something higher than ourselves. You all know my service. There is nothing I would not give for Earth and its people. The darkest moments in the history of the League were faced by councils just like this one. Today was faced what is perhaps the greatest challenge that any council has ever faced in our long history. We cannot fail. We must not fail. As he stepped down, applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising in tempo, and some of the senators began to stand to give a standing ovation. De Veers had to give the senator credit. He was a gifted orator. Indeed, some had predicted him to be the next UEL chairperson. It took a few minutes before order was re-established, with some of the senators crossing the council floor to shake hands and exchange words with the now-seated defense senator. Several other senators spoke before some of the discussed proposals were put to a vote. De Veers waited long enough to be sure that his measures passed before leaving. The rest he would leave for the bureaucrats. He had what he needed. Stalker stood alongside Link, Major Marcelino, Captain Jansen, and Janet Combs on the bridge of the Artemis as they led the Third Fleet into Earth's orbit after the return journey from Pavonis. All were quietened by the sight that was spread before them. It seemed to Stalker that every warship in the UEF was arrayed in various formations around Earth. There were warships of every size and type, from large assault carriers, battleships and battlecruisers, to smaller cruisers, destroyers and frigates, while here and there flights of nimble interceptors weaved between the assembled armada. At the concentration's heart was one ship that stood out, being far larger than the rest. Stalker recognized her immediately. She was the largest man-made object in existence and the flagship of the UEF. She was the UES Genesis, and she was a sight to behold. The vast vessel stretched almost 12 kilometers in length, dwarfing the rest of the fleet, and was one of a kind. Built to serve as the fleet flagship, the Genesis, the also served as a test bed for new systems and was designed to push the limits of what was technologically possible in warship and weapons construction. Stalker stole a look out of the corner of his eye at Janet Combs. He saw she was standing close to Link, and inwardly he smiled to himself. Janet Combs, he had observed, was a woman who was direct and to the point when she wanted something, and she had taken more than a little interest in his deputy commander over the past week. Attention that the normally quiet and soft-spoken Link had been unsure of how to handle. There was no doubt that Janet was an attractive woman, and Stalker had to concede that she was stunning in her own right. Link's obvious discomfort with her forwardness had proved to be a source of open amusement for many in the 21st Company, Stalker included. Once the ship had come to full stop and was in position, Stalker excused himself from the bridge and began to head down to the crew quarters to double-check that all units were ready for departure. Link made to follow, but Stalker stopped him. "It's okay, Link, I've got it under control. Stay here a while and enjoy the view." Without waiting for Link's reply, Stalker left, but not before catching a knowing wink from Janet. When Stalker stepped off the skirmisher assault gunship several hours later, it was to a warm breeze and the distinctive smell of dust and salt water. Before him was a sprawling military base, which was bristling with activity. He had arrived at the Terra Nova's current base of operations at Arica, in Chile. In the distance, Stalker could see the welcome sight of black armored soldiers mixed in with larger numbers of camouflaged infantry uniforms. Stalker had arrived ahead of his company to attend a divisional briefing. Big changes were happening. As Stalker threw his bag onto a waiting wheeled utility vehicle, he looked out over the Vase base to see an impossibly blue sea shimmering in the distance. And he found himself for a moment thinking of Zoe's blue eyes and how long it had been since he had seen them. He felt a sudden ache and had to work hard to control it. There, and then he vowed to himself that no matter what, he would make the time to see her before the next deployment, a deployment that he knew had to be coming, and soon. Stalker stowed his gear in a hangar that would serve as the temporary accommodation for his company. He then went for a jog to loosen up before showering and eating. Stalker saw he still had an hour before the assigned meeting time and headed to the second Terra, Nova's newly established CP. Stalker walked into the CP passing the staff officers to find a serious-looking D poring over a stack of digital report slates. A large holographic map of Earth and its surrounding systems was also activated and was slowly rotating in the background. "Fancy seeing you here, D. That desk suits you." D looked up and tossed the slate he was holding back onto the pile on the desk in front of him and warmly shook Stalker's hand. Stalker took a seat opposite his CO. "So, what's the go, D?" "Plenty. I had a chat with Alpha 1 as soon as we arrived in system. There's a crash expansion program in effect, and the entire UEDF is being reorganized." As Stalker listened, D explained that the UEA's normal standing strength of 10 infantry, 6 mechanized for armored, and 2 air mobile corps, amounting to over 4 million soldiers, was in the process of being more than doubled. A reorganization that, when completed, would give the UEA a standing strength of over 10 million soldiers. That figure didn't include the UEA's 10 independent armored cavalry divisions and 20 independent armored brigades. It also didn't include the elite soldiers of United Earth Special Operations Command, USOC, or the 1st Mecha Corps, whose strengths were still a closely guarded secret. The ongoing expansions would include, however, the 8 independent mecha battalions of the UEA, which would be ramped up to 20. The assault divisions, however, were exempt from the expansion, as they had always been, and would continue to be used for what they did best: rapidly deployable shock troops to defend strategic locations or assault vital targets. As he listened, Stalker was slightly heartened. He knew that the UEDF's overall strength, despite the growing area it had to patrol, had been steadily shrinking for decades. The UEDF's budget was constitutionally enshrined in the UEL Constitution at a minimum percentage of GPP, gross planetary product. Although spending hadn't been reduced below that hard limit and GPP had grown steadily, it hadn't kept pace with the ever-increasing cost of the UEDF's high-tech weaponry. The net result was a slow but steady decrease in the UEDF's overall size from its peak during the last of the wars before unification, when war had raged both on Earth and across far-flung colonies. It was dark by the time Stalker walked out of the briefing. It proved to be mostly a rehash of information he already knew. The results of the Pavonis operation, intelligence assessments of the damage inflicted on the Cerberus, and the overall strategic situation as the UEDF geared up to face the new and still largely unknown threat. Alpha 1 had also made it clear that the Terra Nova could be deployed at short notice. If another attack occurred, it was highly likely that the Terra Nova and the other assault divisions would spearhead any response. Stalker stood in the cool night air, leaning against the corner of a building. The desert cooled rapidly at night, and he watched as wispy threads of his warmer breath swirled and mixed in a frigid stillness as he exhaled. Despite the late hour, the base was still at a high tempo of activity, and a HTE passed overhead, heading for one of the many landing pads on the far side of the base. Stalker looked out past the base perimeter, letting his mind wander. The land darkened and dropped away towards the coast, and the twinkling lights of the city of Eureka glowed and sparkled in the distance, seeming to end abruptly where the city's foreshore met the darkened ocean. The breeze suddenly picked up, and Stalker took a deep breath and soaked it in. He had always loved the smell of the sea, despite the fact that for as long as he could remember, he had hated swimming or boats. Behind him, he could feel the great mountainous expanse of the Atacama, and it tugged at his body with an invisible force. He was more at home in the desert. Much of his childhood had been spent in dry, remote regions, and the vastness, silence, tranquility, and harsh beauty had always appealed to him. The desert never failed to calm his restless soul. Stalker turned his eyes skyward. Despite the ambient light from the base and Eureka, the view was crystal clear. Thousands of stars spread across the heavens in a panorama that had captivated humanity ever since the first humans had turned their eyes skyward countless years before. Humanity had first ventured into space to explore its expanses, millions of stars, millions upon millions of worlds, attracted by the endless possibilities. Stalker wondered if they would have been so captivated and eager to know its secrets if they had known what lurked amongst the stars. Stalker checked the time on his digital watch. It was old enough to almost be a relic, lacking almost all of the modern paraphernalia found on newer timepieces. Instead, it was simple and to the point, just the way Stalker liked it. The blue luminescent display read 0030. Stalker noted that it had updated via satellite to the local time. It gave him an hour until his transport left. Alpha 1 had granted the first and second Terra Nova 72 hours leave as they had missed out on their scheduled rest period due to the sudden deployment to Delta Pavonis. Stalker had been quick to organize a ride. He would piggyback on one of the Swiftfoot transports that was heading up to one of the orbital stations and from there catch another transport that was heading to the large UEAF base at Ramstein in Germany, the current home of the 551st Aviation Regiment and Zoe. With the distance and travel time, it was just past noon local time when Stalker walked down one of the cargo ramps of HSDS at Ramstein. At the bottom of the ramp, he saw that someone was waiting for him, a slim figure in an immaculate deep blue uniform with hands placed firmly on hips. Stalker was dressed in casual clothes and had a bag containing 2 sets of clothes and basic travel items slung over one shoulder. As he arrived at Zoe, he dropped the bag to the ground and threw a lazy salute. Zoe's eyes were hidden behind dark aviation sunglasses, but he could see a serious expression on her face. "What time do you call this specialist?" "Subject to requirements of the service, ma'am." For a long moment, they stood staring at each other before Stalker noticed a slight quivering come over Zoe's serious mask. "You insufferable bastard." Zoe wrapped her arms around him and their lips met. Time seemed to slow as he held her. He had done many things in his life, more than most at his age, but none of his experiences ever compared to holding Zoe in his arms. It felt like their souls melded together, and his heart seemed to sing when she was close. It was dark when Stalker awoke. His mind was foggy, and the cocoon of warmth around him was so inviting that he almost gave in and slipped back into unconsciousness. Next to him, Zoe stirred slightly. Stalker gently ran one hand along her back. Her skin felt impossibly smooth and radiated heat, as if the gods themselves had crafted it. She made a low murmur, and a hand grasped his tightly before drawing his arm around her, holding his hand to her chest. He could feel her heartbeat, and she let out a long, slow breath. "Where do you think you're going?" Stalker smiled and held her tighter. "Nowhere, liar. You were about to sneak out and go for a jog, weren't you?" "No way, I must protest," Stalker replied in his best mock, outraged voice. Zoe turned slightly and moaned as she stretched. "Damn you and your endless energy. Why did I have to love an assault trooper?" Stalker poked her in the side, and she let out a shriek of protest. "It's a hard life, isn't it, sweetness?" She rolled and pinned his hands. "Yes, it damn well is. If you have energy, you should be wasting it on me." Stalker laughed and kissed her. "Is that an order?" Stalker kissed her again, and with the flick of his wrists, rolled her over and pinned her beneath him. "Yes, ma'am." The limited time they had together passed fast, too fast for Stalker's liking. Zoe had used some of her flexi time, so despite the increased tempo in UEDF operations and preparedness, they managed to spend a few days together. A military relationship was difficult. In 3 years, they had only managed to spend on average 3 months out of 12 together. Despite this, Stalker would have never traded Zoe for anyone else. She was the magic to his spell. As the last night, before he had to return to Arica, arrived, Stalker found himself wondering where the time had gone as he looked at Zoe sitting across the table from him. Zoe was the picture of beauty. Her close-fitting black dress was simple but elegant. She wore a minimum of jewelry. Only small diamond earrings matched with a fine silver necklace sporting a small silver pendant with an inset white pearl. For a long time, they just sat regarding each other, sharing the moment and comfort of each other's company, neither feeling the need to force conversation or broach a subject. Stalker tightened his grip on Zoe's hand in the center of the table, and she squeezed back. A waiter appeared by the table. "Guten Abend." Stalker looked at the man confused and was about to mumble something when Zoe shot of some rapid-fire German, and the man nodded with a smile and disappeared. "What was that about?" "I just ordered us some starters and drinks, a red wine for me and a lemon, lime and bitters for you." Thanks, sweetness. I had no idea what either of you were saying. Zoe smiled innocently. Well, you're only an assault trooper. We can't expect too much of you. Stalker raised an eyebrow. Is that right? Zoe laughed lightly. Don't worry, I love you despite your ignorance. Stalker felt her foot touch his leg. Don't try to bribe your way out of trouble. I'm offended now. Zoe pouted, but her eyes danced with mirth. I'm sorry, darling, forgive me. Stalker noted the humor in her tone and winked. You know, if you keep treating me this badly, I'm going to have to make an honest woman out of you. Zoe's expression became unfathomable, but Stalker felt her grip on his hand tighten. That almost sounds like a marriage proposal battle commander. Stalker went into a serious pose, mimicking a classical statue, and feigned deep thought before meeting Zoe's eye. A sincere smile coming across his normally serious face. I know. Stalker awoke instantly and was out of bed before Zoe knew what was happening. The noise that had awoken Stalker was one which he knew and reacted to immediately, his Terra Nova communicator. Stalker entered his access code into the beeping device, which acknowledged receipt of the message with a tone before becoming silent. He then read the writing that appeared on the small digital display. It read Havoc 1 Zulu. Stalker looked at it for a moment as the meaning sunk in. Shit, it was the immediate recall code. Stalker looked back at the bed, his eyes meeting Zoe's, and he saw the realization pass across her eyes, her face changing, becoming businesslike. She slid lightly out of bed and gathered up her clothes before taking Stalker's hand and leading him to the bathroom. You've got time for a quick shower, Commander. Despite the pressing tug of duty, Stalker didn't argue. The wind whipped up as the Swiftfoot transport powered up its engines. The circle of flashing landing lights around the pad, throwing weak scattered beams of light over the scene, revealing a couple in a close embrace. Stalker didn't want to let Zoe go, and in the end it was Zoe who gently prized his arms apart. You need to go, Commander. Stalker nodded resolutely. Yeah, I know. Stay safe, darling. I will. You have my word, I love you. Stalker stepped forward and kissed her, then spoke softly into her ear. I love you too. I'll see you on the flip side. And without another word or backward glance, he headed up the ramp. At the bottom of the ramp, Zoe turned and began to walk across the tarmac towards the brightly lit base buildings. She had a strange, uncomfortable feeling in the pit of her stomach, but ignored it with effort. As she reached the light, she ran her hands down her uniform, smoothing out any small creases, and put on her game face. She had a job to do and an aviation regiment to run. Stalker thought of Zoe for much of the return trip. She was a strong-willed career woman who had an inner strength that he both admired and loved, and the more he considered her, the more she amazed him. When he was with her, everything felt effortless. Stalker had let his mind wander freely as he sat strapped in his seat on the return flight. He knew that once he arrived back at Arica, it was unlikely that he would have the liberty to relax with his thoughts again for some time. When Stalker walked down the ramp of another Swiftfoot onto the tarmac at Arica, he noticed something immediately different. The base's expansive landing pads were occupied with the massive silhouettes of HSDSs. He counted a full dozen of the heavy transports, and around them were clusters of men and machines were in motion. Stalker went straight to the second Terra Nova CP and almost walked into D as he came striding out of the doorway. Nice to see you made it. It didn't stop, but kept walking, Stalker falling alongside. What's the situation? He didn't look up from the paperwork in his hand as he walked and talked. Fleet units have picked up unknown contacts across a dozen systems. Possibly more by now. It seems to grow with every hour. There's been no direct contact as yet. As soon as they get close, the enemy ships turn tail and disappear. It looks like they're probing us, but it's only a matter of time before there's a clash. Where do we stand? The assault divisions and both Operational Aircav Corps are being mobilized for immediate deployment to reinforce the outlying systems. All the regular UEA Corps are being retained for home system defense. How do you read it, D? For the first time, D paused and looked around, waiting for a scurrying junior infantry officer to pass. It looks like us and the Aircav boys are being used for force reconnaissance through combat. They will use us to test the enemy and gain intel on them. I guess the powers that be think we have a better chance of living to tell the tale. Do we know where we're going yet? Looks like to Altair with our old friends, the Third Fleet. The Philistines are off to Tau Ceti with the Seventh, and the Crusaders to one of the Ursi Majori's systems with elements of the Eighth. I don't know about the others yet. Thanks, D. I'll go make sure my boys are organized, but if I know Link, they will be. I saw Link getting them set earlier. He's a damn good man. Go get yourself kitted out. We'll be leaving as soon as the division's heavy equipment is loaded. There was that familiar sinking feeling in the pit of Stalker's stomach as the HSDS lifted off from Arica, but surprisingly little else to give away that they were now airborne. The HSDS's advanced plasma engines lifting the transport smoothly into orbit. Once in orbit, Stalker connected into the MillNet and downloaded the latest intelligence that his clearance level would allow and called a meeting of his CCU to share the information with them. But there was precious little to share. The UEF was still operating under orders to avoid a major action unless attacked or in defense of occupied colonies. While on Earth, the UEA's mobilization was well underway, and the UEF was following suit. Tracking stations and reconnaissance probes had picked up strange scatter transmissions, but they seemed to have no pattern, and their randomness gave no clue to the direction from which the enemy would come, if they came at all. The information on their target system was a bit more useful. The Altair system was located just under 17 light-years from Earth. The system was dominated by the large, bright, fast-spinning star Altair, sometimes also called Aquili. There were 3 planets in the system. One was a gas giant like Jupiter, designated G612. The remaining 2 were rocky and were home to small colonies. Altairus was a small, icy world and was quite distant from the system's sun, and had an average temperature of minus 55 degrees Celsius. It had, however, proved quite suitable to atmospheric conversion, and the process was complete, giving it a breathable atmosphere. Altairus was prized for its abundant water in the form of vast frozen oceans, and it was from Altairus that many other colonies had sourced water for the renewable moisture systems that allowed the colonization of dry worlds. The third planet in the system was Delta Aquili, a large, hot, rocky planet with a very thin atmosphere, which was occasionally torn by massive electrical storms and had oceans of pure mercury. Despite its violent nature, Delta Aquili was home to several mining operations which facilitated the collection of the liquid metal using automated cargo transports that carried the mercury to an orbital storage facility from where it was offloaded to merchant ships at regular intervals. Stalker was going over the possible tactical difficulties that both planets represented when 2 short siren bursts indicated the imminent jump to faster-than-light speed. There was a jolt as the ship jumped, and then no discernible difference. Nothing to betray the great speed that they were traveling at, the first of a series of high-speed runs that would get them to the Altair system in less than a week. At the first transit waypoint, Stalker found himself on the command level viewing bridge amongst dozens of others who had come up from the crew berths and cargo holds to take in view. Stalker saw that there were 15 HSDSs in the convoy. 12 carried the Terra Nova. Stalker guessed that the remaining 3 must be supplies for the Third Fleet or maybe further marine elements. Around the bulky HSDSs moved 2 slightly smaller island-class destroyers. But the convoy's main escort was in the formidable shape of a Unity-class battleship, the UES Determination. The Unity-class were older when compared with the newer Continental-class battleships, but the entire class had recently been put through the latest of their staged modernizations. The Determination was around 5 kilometers in length and looked invincible, dwarfing the HSDSs she was escorting. Stalker knew that the battleship packed an awesome punch and was equipped with batteries of heavy long-range cannons, as well hundreds of lethal missiles, and had advanced defensive systems and armor. Stalker recalled that battleships like the Unity class had evolved out of the destructive wars before unification, when the UEL and alliances of powerful states had begun to colonize and militarize space. Several bitter conflicts had been fought in space, and by the time of the complete unification of Earth, the UEL had a powerful force in the United Earth Fleet. After unification, the UEF's 10 fleets had been maintained and expanded under the mandate of the UEL Charter. The fleets working to secure the ever-expanding colonies from piracy, explore new systems for colonization, and above all secure Earth from any future threat. The trip to the system proved uneventful, and only 16 minutes behind schedule a series of flashes heralded the arrival of the convoy in the Altair system. Stalker and the other officers of the Second Terra Nova were gathered on the command level's viewing bridge for the arrival. Earth time, it was 0230 HRS, and the rest of the regiment was for the most part asleep. Stalker stood next to D and Link and looked out at the view. In the far distance was the great blue star Altair, which dominated the system. Stalker remembered that the more red a star was, the cooler it was, the hottest stars burning blue. That made Altair a very hot, as well as large star when compared to the Earth's sun. As the HSDS turned, Stalker caught sight of the Third Fleet. There was about a dozen warships grouped together, but Stalker guessed that there would be more stationed out further on the system's outskirts or patrolling neighboring systems. Space was a big place, and a single fleet often had to cover a lot of ground. In the center of the formation of ships was one which made even the Determination look superfluous, a massive warship that stretched over 8 kilometers in length, 3 full kilometers longer than the Determination. As it drew closer, there was no mistaking its shape, looking like 2 lengthened battleships joined together, giving it the appearance of a massive twin-hulled catamaran. It was a bird of prey-class assault carrier, the mightiest class of warship Earth had ever produced with the exception of the UES Genesis. Despite still being many kilometers distant, the massive gray warship looked immensely impressive, and Stalker never ceased to be in awe when he saw one. This one was the UES Osprey, one of 11 possessed by the UEF. The assault carriers were the heart of the fleet, one being attached to each of the UEF's 10 fleets, while the 11th was always in space dock being upgraded or refurbished, a task that could take several years. The assault carriers carried heavy cannon and missile armament, indeed almost as heavy as some of the fleet's battleships. But their main armament came in the form of the 1,000 combat aircraft they carried. As Stalker watched, several wings of fighters were cruising lazily around the fleet, keeping a close perimeter. They moved as one with the grace of a flock of birds, the beauty of the scene belying their deadly capabilities. Stalker's eyes left the fighters and focused on the large warships. At the center was the Osprey. Next to her was the Third Fleet's flagship, the Continental-class battleship Africa. There was another battleship also present, another of the Unity class, the UES Inflexible. Stalker also recognized the Artemis and Poseidon. Missing was the sleek shape of the battlecruiser UES Aquarius, Stalker guessing it must have been dispatched to reinforce Earth. There were also several smaller island and tribal-class destroyers picketed around the heavy warships. As Stalker watched, a pair of the smaller ships fell in alongside the transports, and the Determination began to pull away and gain speed. It had gotten quite distant when there was a bright flash, and it disappeared. "There goes our escort," murmured one of the company commanders to no one in particular, and Stalker felt a sudden chill run down his spine. Despite the Third Fleet's considerable presence, he suddenly felt very alone and very far from home. Stalker glanced over at Link. His face was an unreadable mask, looking like it was set in plascrete. He had a slight frown, like someone had just told him he had to paint his armor pink. Stalker guessed his own expression must be some variance between trepidation and determination, no one knowing what the deployment had in store for them. Stalker left the others and walked back down to the deck his company was billeted on, passing and greeting several other Second Terra Nova soldiers on the way before stopping in the cargo area. In a vast space, securely strapped to the deck, were dozens of black painted armored vehicles bearing the inverted pyramid and skull emblem of the Terra Nova. Regarding them for a moment, Stalker knew they were unlikely to be deployed in this system. The Terra Nova, like all the assault divisions, was in fact a mechanized force. The Terra Nova, having sufficient iron hides, warthogs, and heavier diamond-scale IFVs attached to the 9th Company to allow the entire division to go fully mobile or to operate independently, or keep up with and operate alongside the UEA's regular armored and mechanized forces when needed. Despite this capability, it was one that the assault divisions rarely ever used. Even during the bitter fighting on Mars, The assault divisions had utilized the UEA's armored transports when necessary, preferring to remain air mobile. Stalker yawned inwardly. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, he thought. The next few days passed slowly for Stalker: briefings, fitness training, checking and rechecking equipment. Several of the companies from other regiments were transferred to the fleet's warships to reinforce the Marines, but the 2nd Terra and Nova remained on its HSDS, patiently waiting for a call to action. The storm, when it broke, came suddenly. Stalker was in the main cargo bay, running laps up and down its length, when an announcement came over the transport's internal comm system. All company commanders report to the bridge immediately. Repeat, all company commander report to the bridge immediately. Something in the announcer's voice told Stalker that this wasn't a drill or a normal staff meeting. The balloon had gone up somewhere. Things were about to get interesting. Stalker hurried to the bridge, not bothering to change out of his sweat-drenched PT gear. On arrival, he headed straight for a cluster of men gathered around D and a hollow display. D was standing patiently, not speaking until everyone had arrived. A minute later, the last of the 10-2nd Terra Nova Company commanders arrived, and without delay, D launched into his briefing. All right, here's the situation. 12 hours ago, we were hit across the board. Information is sketchy as heavy jamming is affecting our long-range communications. But so far what we know is that 2nd Fleet has been pushed back from Epsilon Indy. All contact has been lost with the 8th at Ursi Majoris, and the 5th has withdrawn from Wolf 424 and is regrouping at Ross 128. There was a stunned silence, no one quite believing what they had just heard. The commander of the 26th Terra Nova finding his voice first. Any reports yet on casualties? Nothing concrete, but we can expect them to be heavy. We may have taken heavy losses, but we're also inflicting them. The latest report from the 7th at Tau Ceti is that they beat off the initial attack and destroyed around 20 enemy ships. We seem to be the exception. We haven't been hit yet, but that won't last. In the meantime, new orders have arrived from Stratcom. We're to evacuate the civilians from the system as soon as possible. To this end, the fleet will provide a perimeter around Alteris and Delta Aquili while we deploy and evac the civies. The 2nd will be deploying to settlements on Alteris. We will secure the LZs, landing zones, and get the people out clear. D looked over the men in front of him. Their jaws were set in a unified mask of determination. That was good. All right, gear up. Get your company's kit. We move as soon as you're ready.